It has long been said that hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. And in few areas is this more clearly true than when it comes to voting rights. Today we see Democrats giving long, emotional speeches about protecting the right to vote, but today's congressional Democrats do not believe in the right to vote. They do not believe in democracy, and they are championing efforts to take away the right to vote from American citizens. The rhetoric that is being used by Joe Biden, by Chuck Schumer, by other Democrats is consistently inflammatory. Indeed, one of the phrases that they like to use today is Jim Crow 2.0. Ironically and inadvertently, there's some truth to what they're saying, because we do have legislation pending before Congress that would indeed be Jim Crow 2.0. It's worth asking, what was Jim Crow 1.0? Jim Crow 1.0 were a series of racist laws that were written by Democrats, that were enforced by Democrats, whose purpose was to prevent the voters from ever voting Democrats out of power. Jim Crow was offensive, it was racist, it was bigoted, it was wrong, and it was the Democratic Party who wrote, enforced, and implemented it. So what's Jim Crow 2.0? It's the latest efforts of Democrats to write laws to prevent the voters from voting Democrats out of power. Before the Senate is pending S1, what the authors have Orwellingly entitled the For the People Act, but many are rightly calling it the Corrupt Politicians Act. The only objective of the Corrupt Politicians Act is to keep Democrats in power for the next 100 years, to take away the right of American voters to vote Democrats out of power. How does it do that? The Corrupt Politicians Act would strike down every voter ID law in the country. 80% of Americans support voter ID. 60% of African Americans support voter ID. What would the Corrupt Politicians Act do? Repeal every one of those laws. And mind you, this is while Democrats are saying, we support the right to vote, so we're going to take away the decision made by the voters to enact voter ID laws. What else does the Corrupt Politicians Act do? 29 states have prohibited ballot harvesting. Ballot harvesting is the corrupt practice where you send operatives to collect the ballots of others. So a paid operative, for example, from the DNC will go into a nursing home, will collect hundreds of ballots from seniors, some of whom may no longer be competent to make a decision. And the reason 29 states have prohibited it is that it invites fraud. And in a scrupulous operative, it's very simple for that operative with someone with diminished capacity, for them to vote the ballot the way they want it to. And if someone has the temerity to vote for the other side, the corrupt operative can just throw that ballot in the trash and never mail it in. If you actually cared about the integrity of elections, you'd want to stop ballot harvesting. What does the Corrupt Politicians Act do? Strikes down every law that prohibits ballot harvesting and mandates it nationwide. If the Democrats who say they protect the right to vote believed it, why do they want to strike down what the voters chose to adopt, which is protecting the integrity of their elections? The Corrupt Politicians Act automatically registers to vote every single person who interacts with the government in any way. That means if you get an unemployment check, if you get a welfare check, if you have a driver's license, if you go to a public college or university, bingo, you're automatically registered to vote. What is the predicted and, in fact, intended consequence of that? That millions of illegal immigrants would be automatically registered to vote. In fact, the Corrupt Politicians Act explicitly immunizes the state officials who would be registering illegal immigrants to vote. Now, when you register millions of illegal immigrants to vote, you are stealing the right to vote from American citizens. That is not protecting the right to vote, that is stealing the right to vote. The Corrupt Politicians Act mandates that felons all across the country be allowed to vote, because Democrats have made the decision that if millions of illegal immigrants and millions of felons and murderers and rapists and child molesters are voting, they believe they're likely to vote for Democrats. Just a moment ago, the chairman said that voting rights legislation should not be partisan. Well, the Corrupt Politicians Act is nakedly partisan and what really admits the entire joke. Federal Election Commission, when it was enacted in the wake of Watergate, it was designed to be bipartisan. 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. What does the Corrupt Politicians Act do? Makes it partisan, makes it 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans, so that Chuck Schumer would have the Federal Elections Agency as an attack dog to use as a political weapon, not to protect integrity, not to follow the law, but to ensure that Democrats can never be beaten and the voters don't have a right to vote. When congressional Democrats talk about Shelby County and wanting to make every jurisdiction in America subject to DOJ preclearance, understand what that means. That means your state legislature in your home doesn't have the ability to pass laws concerning voting without getting an unelected bureaucrat in the Department of Justice to sign off on it first. Mind you, this is after Joe Biden is nominated and Senate Democrats have confirmed extreme partisans to the Department of Justice. Kristen Clark, who is a left-wing radical activist, would be in charge of voting laws all across the country with the ability to stop any elected legislature from passing laws concerning voting. I ask you, if you actually believed the rhetoric from Democrats that you wanted to protect the right to vote, why the hell would you say you can't vote in the state legislatures unless an unelected Democrat who's not accountable to the people says it's okay? This is not about the right to vote. We heard some stringent rhetoric about the Supreme Court's Brnovich decision. I'll tell you, I was proud to lead an amicus brief for 11 senators in the Brnovich case. State of Arizona quite reasonably prohibited ballot harvesting because ballot harvesting invites fraud and is corrupt. And the Supreme Court, by a vote of 6-3, agreed with the position that I advocated on behalf of 11 senators, that states have the authority to protect the integrity of their election. We should protect everyone's right to vote. And I will note, by the way, the civil rights legislation that has been adopted, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a significantly greater percentage of Republicans voted for it than did Democrats. 82% of Republicans in the Senate voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. 69% of Democrats did. We should protect the right to vote, and that means not striking down common sense voter integrity laws. That means not subjecting elected state legislatures to oversight by unelected bureaucrats. That means protecting the right to vote for everyone, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity. And one of the ways you protect the right to vote is enacting common sense protections to stop that right from being stolen. And unfortunately, congressional Democrats are not interested in doing that.
Thank you, Senator.